Hello and welcome to today's video. Today I've chosen an article about Iceland and how it has allowed whaling, that's the practice of hunting or killing whales, to resume after a temporary ban. So as usual, we'll look at each paragraph in turn. I'll read it out loud and you can either read it with me or read it at a later date and just listen. And we'll also be looking at a few interesting words that we find along the way. So, Iceland has lifted a temporary ban on whaling that was imposed in July after the International Whaling Commission, the IWC, raised concerns about the country's quota and scientific methods. The decision, announced by the Ministry of Fisheries and Agriculture on Wednesday, allows Icelandic whalers to resume hunting fin and minke whales in the North Atlantic. So the first word we have highlighted at the top here is ban. This is both a verb and a noun. As a verb, it's a regular verb, so it has an ed ending and is pronounced banned with a double N. The simplest way to explain this is by thinking of a synonym, because the closest synonym we have is to prohibit, and that is to make something illegal. So when the government bans something, it usually passes a law that makes that action illegal. Could be temporarily, like as in this case, or it could be permanent. A simple example would be the banning, the prohibition of smoking in public places like restaurants. In Spain, this happened, I think it was probably nearly 20 years ago. It's quite a long time ago. But before that, people could smoke pretty much wherever they wanted, in restaurants, bars, discos. And then the government decided to ban smoking in those places, so people could no longer smoke in those public areas. Okay, let's move on to the second word we have in this paragraph, which is quota. It's pronounced quota. This is a noun. Basically, a quota is a certain quantity of something. It's quite often used when we talk about fishing, actually. It's probably the most common case where you would see it is when we're talking about fishing quotas. So the European Union, for example, sets fishing quotas for different kinds of fish. The idea of this is to protect the fish and to stop overfishing. That is when the fishermen take out or catch too many fish, and then the whole number of fish declines or decreases. So the idea is that the quota or the quantity of fish that can be caught each year is set according to scientific principles. So I suppose they measure the breeding rate, how fast the fish reproduce, and other factors, and then they set a certain quantity of fish that can be extracted. Okay, so let's move on to the second paragraph. Iceland is one of 3 countries, along with Norway and Japan, that continue to hunt whales despite a global moratorium on commercial whaling that was established by the IWC in 1986. Iceland argues that whaling is a traditional and legitimate part of its culture and economy, and that it only targets abundant and non-endangered species. However, the resumption of whaling has drawn criticism from environmental groups and some foreign governments, who accuse Iceland of violating international law and undermining global efforts to protect whales. So the first word we're looking at in this paragraph is moratorium. This is derived from Latin. It's a noun in English. Originally, it meant to delay something, and usually, in effect, it is used in a similar sense in modern English, because when the government imposes a moratorium on some activity, it's usually a temporary ban. And it quite often happens when there's some new technology or new discovery that makes that action or that activity dubious in some way. Maybe the government or scientific bodies need more time to investigate and to find out the consequences, whether it's safe or not. An example of this, I think, could be genetically modified foods. When these were first introduced into the market, certain governments imposed a moratorium on their import because of safety concerns. They wanted to find out more information and to see if they were safe or not. So they imposed this temporary ban or this moratorium of a few years until further information became available. Second word we have is target. To target. In this case, it's used as a verb. It's talking about the whalers targeting abundant and non-endangered species. Target can also be used as a noun, can actually be a physical object. If we think about a sport like archery, where people fire arrows at a target, they try to hit the target with their arrow from a distance. But of course, a target is not always a physical object. It can be used to represent your objective, the thing that you're trying to reach. If we talk about sales targets, which is a common collocation, if you are a salesperson, your job is to sell, then usually you have a target. It's a certain quantity of product that you want to sell each week. That's your target. That's what you're aiming for. You're trying to achieve that level of sales. And in this case, it's basically talking about the fact that the whaling industry targets only certain non-endangered species, so those that are abundant. There are plenty of them. So it aims to catch only those ones which are not endangered. And the final word we have today in this paragraph is undermining. This is a verb, to undermine. And it's composed of two elements. The first one, under. So this indicates the origin, actually, of this concept. To mine basically means to dig a hole in the ground, traditionally to extract minerals like coal or other metals or valuable minerals. And the fact that we're undermining something here means that we are digging a hole under another object. Traditionally, this was a tactic used in warfare in the times when there were large fortifications or castles with very large walls that were difficult to penetrate. One of the tactics they used was to dig a mine, a hole under the wall, to undermine that wall and to weaken it, to make it come tumbling down, to make it fall down and collapse. And that is the sense that we're using it here, but figuratively, it's not literal. So in this case, it's accusing Iceland of undermining the efforts to protect the whale. So that means they are weakening those efforts. They're making them less effective in their view. Okay, so let's move on to the next, the third paragraph. Iceland's decision to resume whaling is a huge setback for whale conservation and a blatant disregard for international law, said Sigrid Luber, president of Ocean Care. Whaling is an outdated and barbaric practice that belongs to the past, not the future. This is a shameful move by Iceland, which shows a complete disregard for the welfare of these magnificent creatures and the wishes of the global community, said Vanessa Williams-Gray, a campaigner at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. So we have 4 words in total here. The first word is setback. This is a noun. So if we suffer a setback in our plans, then we basically have to go backwards. We are not progressing. We've encountered some kind of a problem or an issue, and therefore we have to go back and start again, perhaps. Maybe not back to the beginning, but at least partly. So obviously a setback is a bad thing. If you're trying to achieve an objective, you're aiming for a particular target and you suffer a setback, then obviously that means your plans are going to have to be changed. Probably it will take you longer to achieve your objective. This is actually a noun form that is formed from a phrasal verb to set somebody back or set something back, which has the same meaning. Okay, so let's move on to the second word here. We have outdated. Outdated. This is similar to another word, which is old-fashioned. It's an adjective, and it's basically saying here that the practice of whaling or hunting whales is something that doesn't fit in the modern world. It is old-fashioned and perhaps something that should be stopped. It was common in the past, but maybe nowadays it's not common because people see it as not relevant to the modern world. It's outdated. If we think about technology, there's a lot of examples of outdated technology. Think about the fax machine. 30, 40 years ago, fax machines were very prevalent. You could find them everywhere. Very, very common way of sending information over the telephone lines. Then, of course, the internet developed. We had email and the web and everything else, and ultimately mobile phone technology. So those progresses in technology made the fax machine completely outdated. Nowadays, hardly anybody uses that technology. So the third word we have is shameful. This is a shameful move by Iceland. So shameful functions here as an adjective. Shame is the noun, the abstract noun. If we talk about shame, we are using a similar concept to that of embarrassment. When you are embarrassed, you have done something in public that perhaps is not seen to be very good. So perhaps maybe you fall over in public and people start laughing at you, therefore you feel embarrassed. So the concept of shame, or something that is shameful, is very similar to that. But usually, this is the difference, usually it's of a greater degree of severity. So it's something much more serious. So if I fell over in the street, I might feel embarrassed, right? A little bit embarrassed. But in order to use the word shameful, I would have to do something that's considered really bad. So for example, committing a crime, stealing something, and then being found out, probably I would feel ashamed. This is a shameful action. So obviously this is a very negative adjective that's used to describe things that are seen as being particularly bad. Final word we have in this paragraph is wishes. Wishes. Now obviously this is a noun because we're talking about the wishes of the global community. Wish can also be used as a verb commonly. It's usually used as a verb to express the idea of regret. People often confuse it because in this case, it's more of a desire. It's what you want. And it is actually sometimes used in expressions like, we wish you a Merry Christmas. But as a verb, it's quite different. Nowadays, we normally use it in situations where you've done something wrong and you wish you hadn't done it, using the past perfect, or if we're talking about the present situation and you're not happy about it, you would like to change it, then we can say, I wish I was rich. So I'm expressing my regret, my dissatisfaction about the present. So that's as a verb. As a noun, we can talk about wishes in a similar way to desires. So it's what, in this case, is what the global community wants, what it desires, what it wishes for. It's a slightly more formal way of talking about the wants of the community. So let's move on. The whaling industry defended its practices, saying that it was sustainable and humane. We are not hunting endangered species, we are hunting abundant and healthy stocks that are well managed and monitored, said Gunnar Bergman Johnson, the managing director of one of the whaling companies. According to the ministry, Iceland's whaling quota for 2023 is 209 fin whales and 217 minke whales, which are based on scientific assessments of the whale stocks in the North Atlantic. The Ministry of Fisheries and Agriculture said that Iceland's whaling industry employed about 100 people and generated about $25 million in annual revenue from domestic sales and exports of whale meat and products. So we have three words here highlighted. The first one is the adjective abundant. Abundant. We are hunting abundant and healthy stocks. So if we are using this adjective to describe something, it basically means there is a lot of it. If it's abundant, it is not in short supply. So they're arguing here that the particular species of whale that they are hunting is reproducing very well, and there are a lot of whales. So it is acceptable in their view to hunt those species. The opposite of this adjective would be scarce. So if something's scarce, it's definitely not abundant. There is a lack of it. Okay, so the second word here is stocks. This is a noun, and if we talk about the stock, we're basically talking about a certain quantity of something that exists. It's a word that's often used in sales. If you have a shop, then you have a certain stock of a particular product. If you're selling shoes and you sell a lot of a particular style of shoe, then you have to order more stock from the factory. And usually that stock is kept in a place called a stock room. So in this case, we're talking about the stock of whales. So the quantity or the total number of whales is the stock. And the final word we have here is revenue. That's a word that's connected with money. We're talking about $25 million in annual revenue. So the revenue is the money that you receive from a certain commercial action. In this case, from selling exporting the meat and the other products that are derived from the whales. They sell those abroad and also domestically, and they receive money from those sales. That is the total revenue. So that's it for today's video. We've finished, and if you'd like to download the text file and read it for yourself, you can do that. You can find the link in the video description underneath. Please, of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want to listen to the future videos when they're released. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.